Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the March Leadership Live webinar. We're glad that you're here, and it's always a pleasure to be with the folks at Rosewood. We've been doing this for, gosh, over 10 years, and we learn from it. And we actually sometimes get to share some of the lessons learned with our students. And you all have also been supportive of our students. And some of you, I see Scott's face now, some of you have been out to speak to our students as well. So we appreciate that. Scott, we're going to have you back. So that was not the last time. So I'm not going to take a lot of time here. Terrence Lachey is a familiar face. He's done several Rosewood webinars and is a frequent guest for us. But this is the first time that we're introducing Dr. Terrence Lachey. So congratulations to him for completing a doctorate in educational leadership, organizational leadership, excuse me. And so the quality should be even better today. So I'm going to mute myself and turn it over to him.
You know, technically, it could cost a lot more too, Dr. Fubara. Inside joke. Listen, thank you so much. It's always a privilege to be with the Rosewood Group. I use you often as examples of how well a company incorporates passion as well as purpose, and then offers the individuals who are part of the company to be a part of a family. I've noticed that over the years. It's probably been 3 years plus, I guess, that I've been doing sessions through Campbell University. And I thank Dr. Fubara for the opportunity. It's always a privilege to stand in front of great people. I'm actually standing today, so I can jump into this. The why for the company, of course, and the organization is clear, and we always start out with that. Jay is on our ones and twos, also known as the turntables. So thanks, Jay. To multiply the blessings and opportunities that have been placed into our trust. I share that as a prototype often when I'm working with companies in their strategic development, when they're looking to summarize a mission statement or a focus for their companies. And I believe that this is one that is both rooted in faith as well as one that works practically in principle. Let's go to our next slide, Jay. The quarter, of course, is the end of quarter one. And just a quick glance, you can see where we are today. We are at adapting to change in leadership. So we'll be wrapping up quarter one, and it looks like quarter two is going to be around building high performance teams. All right, we can advance to the next slide and jump right in, since I only have, what, 3-4 hours to do this? No, just kidding, just kidding. Adapting to change in leadership. That's a topic that I'm passionate about because, one, it keeps me employed. I'm always talking to groups about change. Change is inevitable. It's something that many people oftentimes resist, and we'll get into it today. If you can advance the next slide, Jay. I wanted to share this. Change is a constant. It's all around us. It's in technology, it's in processes, it's also in people and ideas and in methods. Everything changes. I was walking past the nursery at the church, and there's a big sign that says, "We shall not all sleep, but we should all be changed." And that's actually taken from scripture, but it is also quite appropriate. We shall all be changed. Now, whether we are an infant sitting in a nursery or whether we are adults in our workplaces, we have to somehow be willing to adapt to the idea, the concept, and the fact that change happens. Let's go to the next slide. I'll be opening up for some questions and things, but the objectives for today is that we want to focus on strategies for thriving in our evolving roles. Evolving is a word that alludes to change, evolving, not dissolving, but evolving, changing, growing, developing, becoming better. Secondly, we want to look at embracing change as a growth opportunity. Growth opportunity. Often people look at change as being a consequence, a result of something else happening. But what if we looked at change as being a growth opportunity? And then third, we'll look at describing the WIIFM, or the WIFM philosophy. It's the individual motivators for change, and I'll talk a little bit more about that if you haven't heard about WIFM. It is a radio station on everybody's dial. Number four, we'll discuss the needed components to develop a change management or communication plan. And it'll just be chunks that you can take and kind of break down and develop your own plan. And then item number 5 in our objective list, of course, would be to suggest some strategies for gathering data, as well as addressing some concerns, issues, evaluating maybe even the options, and adapting a change direction. And we'll do that through Q&A, give you an opportunity to do some questions. And at any point, you can drop things in the chat. I'm sure that between Dr. Fubara and Jay, they'll say, hey, you got something in the chat, and we'll take a look at it. But if you also want to take your device off of mute and then just jump in and say, hey, I've got a question, that's okay too. It won't throw me off. Let's go to the next slide. Are there questions so far? Are there any thoughts about these objectives you might want to delve into? Great, we'll go further. Well, Pauline Kaiser, let's take a look at Pauline. She was a former, I think she was a senator, woman senator, who made a lot of change, but she was noted for her benevolent work and her community service. She established an organization that is still in existence today, helping people and communities, but it's through the process of navigating change. And this is a quote that she's famous for. Continuity gives us roots, change gives us branches, letting us stretch and grow and reach new heights. And that's a pretty profound statement if we look at it from a very positive perspective. Some people look at change, like I said, as a consequence, or maybe even as a result of something that happened, good or bad. Whereas she alludes to the same philosophy that I'm trying to admit today, is that, the continuity is just, that's the bottom, that's the roots. But change gives us an opportunity to branch out and to grow and produce more fruit. Let's go to the next slide. We'll jump right in. So preparing for change is something that oftentimes people don't necessarily prioritize, but we're very, very good at prioritizing as a result of change. When something shifts, the most recent pandemics that we experienced, we immediately went into change mode. And then here we are a few years later, still adapting to change, maybe even embracing some of the things that we picked up during that interruption or that disruption, and then also now fine tuning some of the changes that will never go away, which means that they're no longer changes, they're now constants, and then we'll be facing future changes as other things develop. But change management initiatives have become a business discipline, and they're the driving bottom line results through changes in systems as well as behaviors, remote work, technology such as this. There were days when I would have had to get a flight to fly to a space and assemble all the people to stand before you and present this. And now we can be in multiple locations in multiple places around the country, maybe even around the globe, and still be effective in communicating a message via the technology that we have. Our behaviors change because if we were in person, I'd be a lot more energetic, as if I could get any more energetic. But I would also engage. I would stop and pause and call you by name and have you share stories. And we can do some of that, but the change of being remote and being within the confinements of a certain amount of time, because we could get Zoom lag or team lag, as they would say, it prohibits us, or it causes us to have to think about keeping it moving. That's the cue for the next slide. Another thing to think about is that if we are going to navigate change, we should probably have a strategy. And I strongly suggest that we define our strategy. It's critical to manage change by creating and implementing a strategy that defines an approach consistent with the unique needs of the organization, which means that there's no one cookie cutter process for change. There's no one established template that says, here, this is how you manage change, or this is how you overcome the challenges of change. Well, it really should be a strategy that is defined ahead of time by the people in the organization, that is, of course, consistent with the unique needs, the vision, the client base, the audiences that you serve, but it should be unique to the organization. Let's go to the next slide. While it should be unique, there are some things that are pretty much universal, and that would be, of course, building teams around change. In order to effectively implement a team that is positioned for success with change, leaders have to select members who will display a high degree of skill. Now, of course, there are people who major, quote unquote, in change management, and that's both academically as well as professionally. There are people on the team that could be considered people who monitor the risk, or people who mitigate risk, or watch for liabilities. Those are absolutely team members that you would identify as being change agents or those who could help in navigating change, sudden change, or response to change. Well, what if an organization actually built a team that was already in place that, in the event of change or almost predicting the next level of change or the need for change, they're always meeting, they're always consistently ready in doing the what if case scenarios. And that's in small teams as well as large teams. But building a team is going to be a component, important factor in the process of being prepared for successful change navigation. We can go to the next slide. And if, like I said, if you have any questions, feel free to throw your hand up. Now, I mentioned the philosophy of WIIFM. That's what's in it for me. WIIFM is on the radio dial of every person's receptor, everybody's radio, the internal radio that plays the music, that plays the theme song. Somebody once said that every hero has theme music. So, try to imagine just for a moment what your theme music would be. And that theme music is probably heavily influenced by a certain tone or certain genre, maybe even a certain style that does this. It speaks to the nature of the change. It speaks to the organizational context of the change. And it also speaks to the personal situation of me in the change situation. And then, of course, it can be the motivator. Music goes good with everything, or everything goes better with music. So what happens is oftentimes people tune in immediately to deciding whether or not they're going to resist the change or go with the change based on what's in it for them. Let's go to the next slide. The WIIFM philosophy, Jim Rohn, I think, was the first person I heard to use it, but it's been pretty popular. It's the beginning of change processes in showing that how it affects the parties that are involved. Will it improve their environment? It'll initiate, of course, the process for a positive note if we're able to acknowledge the fact that there's something in it for everyone, even though there are those who may make larger sacrifices than others. I was in front of a leadership group the other day and I talked about commitment to change and how we must embrace moving out of our stagnant ways. And I said, there are two types of people who come to the table when we have breakfast. There are those who are the people who bring the eggs. The chicken or the hen will bring the eggs, and that's a sacrifice, of course, and it makes everyone happy. And the chicken is, alive to talk about it. But then there's the pig who brings the bacon. So you got some people, when it comes to change, they're producing the eggs, and then there are other people who has to produce the bacon, in which case their sacrifice is a lot greater. If we were to have dialogues or conversations around what's in it for me, or what do I have to sacrifice, or what do I stand to gain? Notice I said gain as opposed to lose. So when we look at it from that perspective, there's nothing negative about the WIIFM, just most people aren't willing to admit it. Most people are not willing to admit their first and foremost thought is often safety and protection for themselves, or where do I land? Let's go to the next slide. Like I said, feel free to jump in with questions or comments. We talked about team a few minutes ago, about how it's important to have a team. In addition to a team in place for navigating change, building support in the environment for change is one of the things that I've seen be very practical. Effective communication, of course, is that essential for building the support throughout the organization. And the mission statement, as well as the values, core values of the Rosewood Group, I think lend to that type of support, letting people know that they're partners in the process and that they do matter and that their opinions or perspectives are important in context, but effective communication is the key to building the support before change happens. Let's go to the next one. So how do we understand change? Is it an art? Is it a science? Or is it both? Is it an art? Is it a science? Or is it both? I would like to say that it uses both sides of our brain for sure. When I do teachings or facilitation around emotional intelligence, we talk about the fact that a person has to be intrinsically motivated in order to be capable of motivating others or inspiring others, but it requires a thought process. Change being constant and understanding its composition on an individual level can help us to relate to the organizational level, which means that if it's managers or leaders or team leads that have a common understanding around the fact that change occurs and happens, it becomes a little easier for the organization to absorb it. I don't like to use the term trickle down, but everything happens from leadership. Leadership is influence. And according to John Maxwell, it's influence, nothing more, nothing less. So if the influencing factors of change in an organization is centered around it's constant, we adjust, we navigate, then typically the organization will have the same type of culture or flavor. Let's go to the next one. So what are the influences then on change? No organization is an island. And external forces are always influencing and interacting with this existence, which means that although a change may be internal to an organization, it is going to somehow outface or it'll be external, and it'll be experienced externally, which means the clients we serve, the people, the communities that we impact are also affected by changes. So let's say a downsizing, upsizing, or right sizing is taking place in a company. It will have an impact on how we're able to service our accounts. Or if there are vendors or there are people who were used to working with an individual and that person's no longer with the company or organization, of course it's going to have an impact. And it'll take some time to make those adjustments. The sooner you get out ahead of change, the better often it is. But sometimes when change happens suddenly, or you have to make split decisions on change, you'll have to roll with the flow of playing the winners. Key influencers, people who have the voice or the opinion or the perspective, are going to be important when we're talking about the outfacing for our customers. Let's go to the next one. So here's some common reactions to change. And remember, these are large chunks. Common reactions to change include things such as denial, resistance, anger, indifference, and then acceptance. Now, this is not a particular order in which things happen, but they may look quite similar to the stages of grief. How many saw that? You looked at them and you're thinking, that's just like the stages of grief. Well, denial, of course, in both common reaction to change and grief, is when the person doesn't want to accept what's happening and they kind of have a nod, an opposite nod. I often share the story of when my wife and I first got married 37 years ago this August. We were having our first dinner at home together and we cooked, and then we left everything on the kitchen and we went and sat down in the living room and we were watching television and it's time to go eat. So she gets up and she's going to get her plate and she stops for a minute. She looks at me and she goes, "Did you want me to fix your plate?" And hopefully you guys can see me. My head is shaking. No. She was like, "Did you want me to get your plate?" And my response to her was, "No, it's okay. I can get it myself." And so I've been nodding up and down for 37 years about whether or not she wanted to get my plate. And I don't have a big problem with getting my own plate. But it was funny to me because the nonverbals oftentimes express a person's reaction to change. And in denial, no matter what they say with their mouths, watch their body language, because their body language could be arms folded, it could be looking away, it could be the nod, it could be a lot of different things, or the scrunched up face, as they would say. Resistance comes in a lot of different forms and shapes as well. Oftentimes, resistance could be passive, and you don't even know where the resistance is coming from, other than the absence, the no comment, the eye rolling, or perhaps even the lack of participation in getting the deadlines met. Anger is often a reaction as well. Sometimes people feel so threatened and their WIIFM kicks in and they become angry. Now, the sad part about anger is that if we allow it to fester, it becomes a very negative thing. But you can be angry and not create an offense. I'm borrowing from scripture there that you can be angry and sin not. So acknowledging the fact that some people may be angry about change is healthy. That's healthy. Indifference, that's dangerous. when the person or the people involved display indifference, that means that you may have lost some people, or you may have to work really, really, really hard to get people to weigh in or to move. It's like pulling a heavy weighted cart up a hill. And then acceptance. Acceptance is one reaction, and that's the one we would like to go for first, right? We want people just to accept it because it is what it is. And I often make that statement, it is what it is, but I add a caveat. Yes, it is what it is until somebody makes a difference or someone changes it. It is what it is unless you're responsible for making an impact. So it is what it is because we made it that. And if it's a process of making something while we're going along in the change process, then it is what it is. But let's make that change. The next one. So here's a puzzle. Look at the piece and how it is so intricately designed to fit into a plethora of other shapes and sizes. Well, think about how change comes. There's a missing piece. But ideally, there is one piece that fits to make the change, big picture, come to fruition. Oftentimes, it's not that easy. Oftentimes, you have to kind of sort through a lot of different pieces in order to make the puzzle fit. So, communication is important, education is important, training is important, and then flexibility. If I were to rank these, I'd say flexibility would be the most significant, because the flexibility of I can make the change, but I've got to remember, and I've got a caveat of A, B, C, D, all those things. Then I could probably be more effective in getting it done. But the flexibility is what's most important. I do an exercise in person often, what by putting puzzle pieces on the table at in groups, and the goal is to be able to put the puzzle at your table together in a limited amount of time. You can't talk, and oftentimes people are wearing gloves. Now that's fun and exciting, right? Well, what people don't know, and I'm giving you the spoiler alert since we're not in person and can't do this. What the people don't know is that the missing piece for their puzzle is at another table. And the only rules and guidelines of the exercise is that you can't talk, you've got to communicate non-verbally and put your puzzle together within the limited amount of time. And so there is inevitably somebody who wants to peek over at somebody else's table and they go, aha, that looks familiar. Aha, that looks like it could help us put a puzzle together. And then they begin to communicate or negotiate, because if it's true for one group of people experiencing change, then it may be true for another group that your answers could be next door, or your answers could be external of the group that you're working with. Let's go to the next one. So leading and managing the change is something that often people will put the onus upon one individual. Can you take a few moments and drop in the chat who you think is responsible for managing change when it comes to an organization? Who's the responsible party? Who do you think the responsible party is? Just drop it in the chat and let's see. Some ideas. Yourself. I like that. Said an unknown user, right? Everyone. I like that as well. All of us. I even like the term us, all of us. Those that participate. That's interesting, Sherry, because there are some people who will resist change. And of course, we could let them off the hook and not expect that they are helping to manage, but we could hold them accountable as well. The person who needs to or wants it most. Wow, that's good too. So that means that the WIIFM principle is definitely in motion. Great. These are some good responses. And of course, there's no one right answer. It's a matter of perspective and where you are, the climate of your organization, as well as your own willingness to follow the golden rule. Everybody knows the golden rule or the platinum rule, right? Do unto others. And when you think about navigating change and trying to incorporate change from a leadership perspective, we do all have some responsibility, even if it's just personal leadership. But being prepared, planning well, and being surrounded by a good team will make the decision making a whole lot easier. Even if it's an individual decision, often we will take time to meditate on it, maybe seek our faith or those in our support systems for some feedback. Thanks for sharing those. Let's go to the next one. So how do we prepare? How do we plan? How do we get ready for change? I mentioned a team. I mentioned honing up on your communication skills, and then of course using the WIIFM station. But preparing and planning for change. How do you plan? Now there is a statement, another adage that I picked up years ago, that people don't plan to fail, they fail to plan. Therefore they fail. People don't plan to fail, they fail to plan, therefore they fail. Now that's a large statement. But I don't ever plan to fail when change is introduced. But I often find myself in hindsight looking at where I did fail. And it could be because I wasn't as prepared. Think for a moment about what we can do now in order to be prepared for next. Now and next. Now is now. Now is right in the moment that we're in. But if we were to fast forward to tomorrow at this time, it would be now, then. Now, I know that's confusing because I said now then, but now moves with you. Now moves with you. But next can be anticipated. Next can be viewed in the scope. It doesn't have to be a telescope. It doesn't have to be a microscope. It just has to be a scope. And so we can look at next and begin to develop some plans. You are likely to experience higher than normal levels of stress, and anticipating this will give you the ability to prepare mentally and physically. Now, the stress that you get when you think about next doesn't have to be negative stress. It could be the mental preparation that's necessary to raise the cortisol level to get the job done, or the endorphins to feel the satisfaction of having the job done or before you. Some people are motivated by challenges. There are people called change agents. And then there are some people who are problem solvers, or people who bring problems in order to solve them. But you got to be prepared, and you got to know who's on your team. Let's go to the next slide. Keeping those lines of communication open is going to be vitally important. Reassuring that your team, that you letting them know that you're there for them, and also recognizing how important it is that they're there for you. It'll provide them, though, with the necessary resources to lead them through the change if you're the leader navigating the change. But sometimes it may even be worth polling the team or finding out who has had experience in this area of change. Downsizing is a good example that I went through with the state of Michigan. I worked as an analyst, introductory level position right out of college. And I managed to hang out and get some promotions and stay there for a little while. But when it came time to downsize or to eliminate payroll and departments, I was one of those people who was given the opportunity to seek employment elsewhere. But I had never experienced that before. You know, of course, I had all of those reactions. Thank you, Dr. Fumaro. I was your boss. I think we both got let go, right? No, you had already left. You decided to go get an MBA or something, if I remember correctly. But what happened was that I had all the negative responses to change because that was my first time experiencing change. So somebody pulled me aside and they said, hey, it's not the first time and it won't be the last. If you stay in state government, you're not only going to get downsized, upsized, and right-sized, but they'll probably call you back, which they did. They did. And I went back and worked a couple more years. And then instead of them quitting me, I quit them and started my own consulting business as a trainer. And so there is some victory, I guess, in loss. But the point is that those lines of communication needed to be open. And the person who pulled me aside and said, it's not the first time they've had layoffs and it won't be the last time, it helped me because they had been through it and it gave me a different perspective. Let's go to the next one. Coping with pushback. And this may be a question that somebody may be afraid to ask. Oftentimes you get pushback from the people that you least expect. Sometimes you will get a negative response from the people that you thought were going to be team players, but you really can't anticipate that because you never know how the person is going to be triggered or how they may respond to the situation. Some people look at it as broken. Some people look at it as something that is grieful. Some look at opportunities. But if you provide the employees or the associates with some choices that still fall within the spectrum of the intended change, it often lessens the blow, meaning you give people the choices. We are going to have to do something different, and these are the options that we have. And of course, all three of those options have to be within the spectrum of the change that is inevitable, if you can have the time to plan that. Any thoughts or questions right here? I'll make sure I leave some room for that. We're moving along pretty good time-wise, so I'll pause for comments or questions. Maybe imposing thoughts.
Hey, Terrence, it's Chandler.
Hey, Chandler, how you doing?
Doing well, sir. Congratulations again on becoming a doctor. So,
thank you. Thanks.
I do think that's important to distinguish this one a little bit from the puzzle piece, because I do see a lot of people try to find the answer, and rarely is it the answer. It's multiple ways to attack it. And so, especially when you have change that even you don't predict, so unplanned or uncontrollable change that comes in and impacts you.
Mm-hmm.
So getting multiple opinions, offering multiple ways to attack the problem, I think helps deal with the change a little bit more.
I agree wholeheartedly with that perspective, because think for a moment about a medical condition. One diagnosis does not a cure make, or is not a lethal sentence. Oftentimes you'll get a second opinion or another perspective about a challenge such as a health challenge. Well, what about a change within an organization? What if we looked at perhaps the audiences or the customer's perspective in that change, the employees who's got to implement the change, the management team that's got to navigate the change, maybe even the corporate leaders who are going to be impacted by the ultimate change, or maybe even initiated the change. So I agree 100%. Looking at all of those different perspectives, recognizing that there is probably more than one way. Right. That's a good contribution. Anybody else?
Terrence, I want, so with this conversation about pushback, and also your previous slide about the fact that people may experience anger, resentment, and have difficulty accepting the change, I wonder if maybe some of the leaders can talk about what's appropriate for pushing back, because I'm sure you don't want, everybody just, starting a riot, but, what,
Mutiny, right?
yeah, what would make sense in your context? I see Scott and Chandler are on the call, and maybe able to provide some guidance on that.
I'd love to hear it.
Yeah, I think with Dr. Fabar with that, and it kind of goes into what Terrence was talking about a bit earlier about having kind of the right people around you to make decisions and to help with change, or the change champions, change agents. There's a lot of great work out there by Daniel Kahneman about, biases and how even, your natural reactions will go against the statistics just because of the way it works. And, Cialdini stuff that Chandler's very familiar with as well. But I think in that regard is you've got to meet the people where they're at. If one individual is upset with the change or is fearing the change, you've got to show that empathy for them, find out where they are, and then lead them forward from that place. If you expect them to adjust or change to your starting position, you're always going to struggle. So as a leader, you've got to be adaptable to each individual member of the team or each individual member of your leadership team, adapt to them appropriately, find out where they are, and lead them to where you want to go. But if you think you're going to force everyone to, going back to Chandler's point, there's an answer, good luck. Because that is probably the hallmark of a poor leader, is one who thinks there's only one way to the next destination. There are many paths to the same endpoint.
Agreed.
And then Terrence, I'm sure and Dr. Fabar can expand, but so many precognition reactions is really what Scott's bringing up of your self-defense, fight and flight, certainly where your neurochemicals are sitting. Cialdini's competency and consistency. So they're going to try to be consistent in order to gain trust, even in light of change. And so I think as a leader, you need to welcome some pushback and some other opinions, because if you get dogmatic, you've already presumed you took in all the information, took an honest assessment, which is what Scott was talking about, bias.
Yeah.
You're under a lot of stress as well. So the leaders, if they are truly caring leaders, have a ton of stress on not just reacting to the change, but how that impacts the employees, families, customers, obviously them, with the example, the acronym that Terrence gave. But a little time to self-reflect, a little time to have some gratitude, which Terrence mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
Those things happen before your brain even has pictures or, the ability to put it in language. So if you're not aware of it, you're likely to move forward without a good self-examination.
Absolutely. I think Scott brought up something worth revisiting. He mentioned bias, but he also mentioned emotional intelligence. I think that is something that can be a winning tool if we are emotionally intelligent, or our EQ is high within an organization. When change occurs, it's expected that we would consider the others. It's expected that we would delay our perspective or opinion by first finding out how this does impact others and how they view it as an impact. So I agree with both of those. Are there other thoughts?
Could you speak a little bit too, because I think we get confused as well on types of change. We call them triggers. And so there's triggers that are foreseeable or you have more time to respond to. And then there's triggers that, time does not allow, or, strongly compresses the ability to go through what you would want. We spoke about pre-planning in order to, deal with some of those. But the reality is,
Sure.
a lot of times your major kind of moves,
Yeah.
they're not in the plan, to be honest with you. They're just, reality comes in, it is what it is, as you said,
Yeah.
and
You got to deal with
speed sometimes steps over the emotional intelligence part because you must react. So
Yeah.
can you talk a little about,
Sure.
time compression? I guess maybe a way to look at it. So,
Well, I think it's worth visiting. You mentioned the term triggers, and I think that there are two types. There's the triggers from trauma, and then there's the triggers for challenges. And the challenges can be negative or positive. The trauma oftentimes is negative, negative, negative. Some people will embrace a challenge that is triggered as a result of a change, and they go, "Okay, hey, let's try it." We've never done it like this before, so let's go after it and see what we can do. And these are personality types or maybe even behavioral styles. But the emotional intelligence quotient that I mentioned is that if a person is empathetic, at being one of the strongest of all emotional intelligences, if they are empathetic, chances are they can delay their own perspectives and opinions. They could prefer someone more than themselves, but they will also be met with that same type of compassion if empathy is one of the values. And so we got a couple of different sciences or different theories at play here. But when it is what it is, I think we become who we are. What happens is that we become basically who we are. And if we are an emotionally sound individual, then we can navigate the change and take others into consideration. If we have some trouble ourselves, which is understandable based on triggers or based on previous traumas, we've got to navigate through that. That's why it's important to support one another. I can remember my grandson being 2 years old, and he told the babysitter that he wanted a snack or it was an ice cream bar. And she said, "No, you can't have an ice cream bar until after dinner." And he says, "No, but I want the ice cream bar now." And she was like, "No, your mom said you can't have it until after dinner." So he looks at her and he goes, "Jill, calm down." He's only 2 years old. And he told her to calm down because she was standing her ground on the no. And he was adamant about getting what it was that he wanted. So, it was a trigger for him, calm down. Like, don't get excited, don't escalate. I'll probably get what I want anyway, right? And think about it. Kids know how to use tools like crying, frustration, tantrums, and adults are just kids who've been around a little longer. Oftentimes we'll see it within the organization, like, "Oh, this person's throwing a tantrum," or "This person is triggered in some kind of way." So I agree with those. You guys want to move forward? We have time for some more Q&A.
One more comment there,
Sure.
Terrence, around the trigger piece. What really helps with triggers is, and you mentioned it earlier, sort of the pre-planning for change. Once that trigger hits, what is that quick mental process you're going through? For us, it always should kick off going through our values, right?
Mhm.
Are we acting with spirit of excellence? Are we doing the right thing? Are we acting with we before me? Is it grace through generosity? Are we innovate to elevate? So if you've created this little kind of quick reaction process that you go through, it will start to slow your natural reactions because you're starting to force your way through it. As aviators, that's how we learn to deal with emergencies. It's trained into you that when something happens, you automatically start going through these processes to take the emotion and the most I guess the thing that's going to trigger you first out of the equation. And so we've got to be better at preparing for the change, because change is constant, as we all know. But what are going to be those 3 to 5 things that we're always going to go through just to make sure that we're aligned? And it will slow down and start focusing the decision-making process. But if you don't think about those right now, if you don't start working, getting the discipline of those right now, it's not going to matter. So now is the time to prepare for the change, not in the midst of the change.
Absolutely. I like that aviator example that you gave. I was also thinking about triage and how triage is kind of a programmed step-by-step process that you follow uniformly in order to get to the urgency of the matter. How triage is done. When you roll into that ER, they're going to ask some questions and check certain things out automatically in a calm, consistent way. And I think that those are goals. That's something that we can strive for individually. I have a tendency when I become really unnerved about something that's getting out of control, change, something I'm unfamiliar with, I have a tendency to get very quiet. I'll come way down because typically my personality is up here. I'm loud, I'm outgoing and all that. But as soon as I have to face a situation of change or uncertainty, I'll become quiet and reflective. And my team members may know that and go, well, what are you thinking, Terrence? And so when they ask me what I'm thinking, it gives me an opportunity to, like I said, go through the step by step by step. Well, if this is going to happen, we should consider this. And I always have to be conscientious not to present it in a pessimistic way, because somebody with a pessimistic personality hears the word change and they immediately go, oh, we're all doomed. And then somebody with an optimistic outlook says, hey, change is good, let's change. And it may not impact them the same way it may change someone else. So I agree, those being ready, put it like this, it's always better to be ready than to try to get ready. Be ready as opposed to getting ready. Do what you have to do now so that you can do what you want to do later, is what my wife used to tell the kids. Right. Let's look at the next slides and we'll have some more room for Q&A. So in gaining that support, and this probably spins off of what Dr. Fabar was talking about, it's vitally important to make sure that all of the stakeholders and the employees are on board with any change. Now, that's not always a luxury that we have. In some cases, whether they're on board or not, you gotta do it because there's no other way. But getting to that point where they trust your decision is something that you can do preemptively. Meaning that if someone is identified as a stakeholder, acknowledged as a stakeholder, identified as an important influence in the operation of an organization, they sometimes will just forego the opinion and say, hey, I trust you. I trust what Scott has to say, or I trust, what Chandler has to say, because in the past, they've shown us that they make good choices or decisions when it comes to change that impacts all of us. And that's trust. That's a whole nother workshop or session, but you build that over time and you build that through some basic elements and principles. I love how it was mentioned that if you revert back to those core values of the organization, you can't go wrong. That is the landing pad. Sort of like telling your kid after they grow up and they may have some life challenge, you can always come back home. That's a good home base for anyone within the organization to find support. Let's go to the next one. So gathering data, I mentioned earlier in one of the objectives that identifying the pros and cons of an option prior to making the decision, that's part of the process. If I were to give you the triage analogy, that's a triage step, is get the data or get the information, get the vital statistics, explore what's going on that's in the right direction, and explore what might go wrong if the blood pressure gets to a certain amount, or if the patient has a temperature of, those are the factors that help you to process data more quickly. Also analyze the two opposing positions to change. See it from both sides. If I have already accepted the change and I am inevitably going to implement the change or be responsible for implementing the change, I could mow over the other person, or I could, even though in the back of my mind I'm going to change anyway, just listen to what they have to say. Find out what their opposing opinion is. Validate the fact that they have a different perspective, but different doesn't necessarily mean that one wins and the other one loses. Different is different. And we learn that when we talk about diversity, when we talk about waylaying our biases. Understand different is different, and people are entitled to their differences, and they have to make decisions based on just how different is it for them. If it's out of the norm of their character, then they should make a really good judgment call and go, that doesn't line up with my character or my personal values or my ethics. And if it does, then let's go with it. It's just different, but let's go with it because it still lines up. My wife and I are completely opposites when it comes to leadership or even looking at life from a philosophical perspective, but we complement one another based on the fact that we have some different perspectives. Very different, but we will come up with the same answers to some of the biggest challenges and crises in life. Not even collaborating or negotiating. If you ask us in isolation, we'll land on the same spot, just different means to get there. And that was mentioned a little earlier, that there are different roads to lead toward the same level of success that you're trying to obtain with change. Let's go to the next one. So addressing the concerns and the issues, of course, you want to engage people. It's better that you engage them than they engage you, meaning be preemptive, proactive, and then supportive by asking open-ended questions, perhaps. But you can also equip your managers and supervisors to be prepared for some what-if case scenarios, and then orchestrate the opportunities. Town halls are great, not after a crisis, but before we get into implementing the change. And then, of course, aligning some incentives with change. You know, the first person to download and adapt to the new software could receive these perks. Examples of incentive or reward is often helpful. Just like we do the WIIFM for maintaining a certain level of security, people that are extrinsically motivated love to know what they're going to get at the end of it. You know, tell them what they get, Bob, you know, kind of thing. People want to know what's the incentive. Let's go to the next one. So evaluating and adapting. Change management team members, they've got to be observing, but it's also important that you record what you see or process what you see, but listening and evaluating the process and the progress is ongoing. Listening skills are absolutely at a premium these days, because if you're listening to WIIFM and it's playing your music that happens to be rock, and I'm listening to WIIFM and I'm listening to my music and it happens to be gospel or jazz, and somebody else is listening to classical pop, or somebody's listening to country, or somebody's listening to you know, their cultural music, it doesn't really matter what you're listening to. You should be able, though, to hear someone else's music as well, just for the respect or the fact that they're listening to something else out of instinct. And so the analogy of listening to someone else's music could turn out that you like what you hear, or it could turn out that that's not acceptable in this environment. It could be, oh, we could use more of that. So you have to be able to listen in addition to observe visually or visibly, or even bottom line, economics, numbers, dollars and cents, cents as in coins, but then there's dollars and cents as in our sensory, how we feel, what we hear, what we see, what we say, and how we do it. Let's go to the next one. We're almost at the close. So making it all worthwhile, you know, the whole embrace the change thing. Once a change initiative is underway, it's really important or critical to sustain that the change is just that. It's not something that we can abandon if we've already geared up to implement it. And these, of course, are intentional changes. Now, if it's a responsive change to something that we had no control over, I always say, you know, you eat the chicken and you leave the bones on the plate, right? We learned a lot of great things from COVID, even though COVID was not a great experience. People lost their lives, people lost their livelihood. Things changed forever. And it will never go back to being the exact same way it was, although there were some good things that came out of us making the changes for survival. There were some opportunities that we identified, some discoveries that we made about ourselves, even the concept. One of the most popular topics that I presented on during the COVID era was emotional intelligence. That was big, because every organization, whether it was an educational institution, a for-profit organization, a nonprofit organization, someone in the faith-based community, they all wanted to know how they should be feeling right now about what was going on. And that one stood out. So now people are incorporating that in their everyday expectations, is that we have sound emotional intelligence. So we've got to make sure that we commit to change and see it all the way through. And then once the change has become a new, maybe established pillar, we follow principles that says we made it through those changes. Now let's make it through these. And that's something that makes it worthwhile for people. They have to realize, yep, it was good that we did embrace. Let's go to the next one. So
real quick, Terrence, sorry,
Yep.
I just wanted to let you know that we are at 10:50, so we got about 10 minutes left.
Perfect. Thanks for the timer. I got a human timer. I love that, Jay. Thanks. Facilitator that is responsible for leading any of the meetings regarding change may consider this. Listening, of course, actively, and that would be nodding, showing the nonverbals, asking the questions, but listen actively, open-ended questions, or even produce an environment where people are encouraged to go deeper. You know, so what is a philosophy that while I was in graduate school, we were looking at investigative research, and we looked at, when you're doing research, it's important for you to know that one answer should trigger a series of other answers, such as, so what? So if this is true, so what after that? And if this is true, so what after that? And the so what became a tool or a mechanism to make us research deeper, and go a little bit deeper. So a facilitator could create that type of environment, encourage diverse viewpoints, and I mentioned that a little bit earlier, organizing information, as well as helping the group to reach a consensus, and then understand that the individual needs of the team members will also affect the teamwork, meaning that the needs that the individual have in meeting our expectations, let's meet those basic needs. If it's, you got to come to work earlier, well, then have the coffee already ready when I get there, or something to, that effect. It could be as simple or as complex as you make it, but giving the team members what it is that they need if you're the leader of the change. Let's go to the next one. Make sure I'm not missing anything in the chat. So celebrating those successes I mentioned before make the change worthwhile, but it's appropriate that managers be actively involved in celebrating the success of you adapted to the change. So this is what we've gotten. If the change is going to change the bottom line and give us a larger profit, oftentimes profit sharing or some incentive of reward, a reward incentive is oftentimes acceptable. Let's go to the next one. I want to get to these quotes at the end. So sharing those benefits, of course, I mentioned sustaining the impact of the change gives people that level of trust. Like I said, if it means we got to do some things differently, change our hours, change the way we do things, if it's going to benefit the whole organization and we get to all share in the benefit, then I'm for it. That's what team members are oftentimes saying when they don't say anything. Let's go to the next one. So the 4 stages, this one is important as I wrap it up. The 4 stages of navigating change and allowing people to participate in that is going up. Of course, the image is climbing a ladder, going to that next level. But discovery, people have to recognize that there are some things beyond just the change. So discovery is an important stage. And then dreaming, meaning being creative, what could happen on the other side of this change. And then design, how we go about the change. Is it safe? Is it structuralized? Is it sustainable? And then, of course, destiny. Now, these are what I call soft words. Destiny, of course, is not destination. Sometimes people will confuse those two and they'll say, if we make these changes, then we'll get this result. Well, what does it mean after you get that result? And how is it part of the destiny of the group, the organization, or maybe even the individual? All right, I think we got to the last slide. So as we wrap it up, I wanted to leave you a couple of interesting quotes. Viktor Frankl made the statement, when we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. Pauline Kaiser, I mentioned her a little bit earlier with the continuity giving us roots and change giving us the branches. But Price Pritchett made this statement, change always comes bearing gifts. Now, that's a provocative statement because if you don't know what the gifts are, sometimes you're willing to accept them and other times you can resist them. But change always comes with gifts. And we have the responsibility of making certain that those gifts are going to serve us well. So with that being said, I'd like to open up for any closing questions or thoughts, or maybe capstone statements, and then I'll turn it back over to Jay or Dr. Fubara.
Yeah, Terrence, just a couple of quick items. First of all, your content is fantastic. I'm a little bit of a change geek, as you know, which is kind of ironic since I'm a black and white person. But what we've done here at Rosewood, we try to follow the ADKAR model, the ProSci ADKAR model, obviously awareness, desire, knowledge, ability, then reinforce. But the thing about change is you can make it a very deliberate process. It takes time and you get everyone on board, but you have to quickly get to that tipping point. We learned that through Malcolm Gladwell's work. We've got to win those innovators. Obviously, they're going to be easy to move. Those early adopters are going to be fine, but then we have to get a certain percentage of that early majority to get that tipping point to move the change, because the key part is going to be getting to a sense of normalcy on the other side of change. Jim would always say, Jim Van Erden, a great teammate of ours, would always say, get to the simplicity on the other side of complexity. And so just like anything, you've got to work your way through it with a deliberate and intentional nature, but you have to get to the other side. Chandler, clued me into the difference between a cow and a buffalo, where a storm will come and the cow will just kind of weather the storm and stay as long as they can and kind of hunker down, where a buffalo will charge the storm to get through it as quickly as possible. So we've got to keep change moving and not slow it down, get to the other side, get to the new state, and allow people to adapt to it. But if we spend too much time in change, it's just going to keep things chaotic.
Absolutely. I agree there need to be genuine changes as well, and not just change for the sake of changing. I often, when back to my analogy of my wife and I in our early days, we're still newlyweds after 36 years, but I'm the one who changes the furniture around in the house. Now we're empty nesters, and I change it just for the sake of changing. I'll move the couch over there or a table over there. And if it was up to her, everything would stay completely the same till eternity. Whereas with me, I need change. I need to look at things from a different perspective. And so there are people on the team that will change things, but there should be some substantial reasoning or outcome when you're talking about corporate change that impacts so many lives. And Malcolm Gladwell deals with the outliers and the people who don't adapt quickly, and they kind of skirt along the edge, but they inevitably are part of the change as well. Either they are participants or victims of the change. Great. Other thoughts or questions?
You made an analogy earlier about how you eat the chicken and leave the bones. And I kind of feel like we're a company that looks at that and goes, why did you leave the bones? You can make soup. We can make broth. We can do stuff with that. Why are we leaving something on the table? There's nothing to be left on the table when we're done. And I love that. I love that we embrace that we look at that and go, well, that's that challenge. But you know what? That's all right. We got this. We can do something different. And the ones of us that keep that and keep our values in mind are the ones when the dust settles, we're still here going, see, we told you.
Mm-hmm.
We made a great soup. You want some?
Absolutely.
Someone else brought cornbread. I feel like that's the company that Chandler wants, and he embraces, and he gives us that luxury to do that. Mm-hmm. And that freedom to do that. And when we get too far with it, then he goes, whoa, 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 whoa. We made too many soups. Hold it back. But, right. We still have that ability to say things. Even, I always get in trouble because I say, well, I'm just a recruiter. And they're like, oh, no, you're not. You're a member of the family. You have the right to have a voice. There's companies you don't get a voice, and it doesn't matter what level you're at, but we all have voices here. And if we choose to use them, we can. And if we choose not to, that's fine too. But we all have a voice, and we're all allowed to look at the picture and go, well, we're left with bones. What can we do about it? Yeah. And do something about it.
I like that, Sherry. I'm gonna add to my analogy, eat the chicken, leave the bones on the plate, but somebody better make soup. I like it.
Yeah, I mean, seriously, why not?
I like it. Great.
Well, I think it leads into your, thank you, Sherry, because it definitely leads into your diversity and certainly in the non-political senses. Terrence might be a city boy, so he doesn't know, Sherry, what to do with chicken bones when he's done with them. But
that's right.
If you don't let everyone speak up and give their opinion and their culture, what they bring to the table, we may think that's the only option. And so it is important to get other people to jump in. Say, wait a minute, what about this? And so I think it is another branch into an important part of really emphasizing how crucial and beneficial it is to have diverse opinions at the table, and try to take it away from what became a political football into the reality of why it's good.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I am a city boy, but I've got some country roots. By the time I'm done with those bones, there's not much left on them. So my wife teases that if I'm eating chicken wings, you will know that they have been eaten. They've been completely eaten, gristle and all. But there are those who don't understand the value of what's left after a change. We can take it and do something. And they're not considered scraps. I look at them as byproducts. It's a byproduct. Right? I think that's a good place to turn it over. It is 10:59. So I want to toss the ball to Jay, and then we can go from there. Thank you so much, you guys.
All right. Thank you. Now, Dr. Lachey, congrats again on your new title. It is well earned. And with that about does it for our Q1 theme of professional growth. Thank you to everyone that came and joined to listen in on the great insight that Dr. Lachey provided. Join us next month for Q2. Thank you, guys.